All right, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in wa ba'd. First and foremost, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Abdurrahman Chao. Um, I went to Medina from 2001 to 2006. I did 1 year of Arabic, and then I did 4 years in the College of Dawah College of Dawah and Usuluddin. And I later came back and worked with the communities around America. And, oh, excuse me, sorry. I think that was a big faux pas right there, talking sideways. All right. So, let's start over again. Alhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Abdurrahman Chao. I'm from Houston. I went to Medina from 2001 to 2006. I did 1 year of Arabic, and then I did 4 years in College of Dawah Usuluddin. I just did the standard program, learning about theology, learning about dawah, and so that was my trajectory. I came back to America and I did some dawah work, worked in masajid, worked in schools, and then I was originally wanting to go to academia, and the economic climate right now in America for the past 10 years has not been very good. So it's a thankless career to be an academic. So anyways, I tried. I went to Vanderbilt and I did a master's in Christian theology, and I graduated in 2011. I was thinking about going to PhD, and then I said, I think we'll stop there for now. So I didn't really continue on with my PhD studies, just stopped with a master's, and now I work in Houston in the oil and gas industry. So what a whirlwind of events. So what I want to share with you today is the concept of strategic learning. Growing up, we always have this issue, right? And as I was an Islamic studies teacher for a long period of my life, and so I wanted to share with you this very urgent concern that I have, and that is the notion of when you have a revert, a convert, a parent, a teenager, someone who is eager to learn the deen, someone who wants to learn about the religion and wants to get to know more about the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and better practice and develop their own spiritual formation, the common question is, where do I start? How do I go ahead doing this? And how do I go about in studying this or that? Which subject do I start first? And it's a very, very complicated question. And I'm going to tell you, the good news is the answer is not complicated at all. The answer is actually very, very simple. And I think, in short, as a teacher, as someone who's studied for quite a long time, the shortest answer that I can give you is what you see people doing professionally as imams. That's one frame of reference that you will have in your life. What you see in regards to what people do overseas and what they study overseas, that's another frame of reference. And what you see in your community of what's going on, the events and the people and the needs and the concerns, that's another framework of reference. So a lot of times people have confused these three frameworks that I would say. Either it is someone who's studied overseas for a very, very long period of time, or you have an imam here in America, or it's you have a masjid and they have issues going on. How do you separate these three frameworks? Well, first and foremost, studying overseas is simply a framework, a way to attain knowledge in a more systematic way, and it doesn't always mean that that person will, if you follow that footstep, that's going to be the best method for you. And some people choose to go study Islam based on the issues that are affecting them in their community. And that's also great, but that will also be sort of weak in the way how you develop your understanding of Islam. And uh, and if you were to follow the local imams that you have, it really depends on where they learned and how they're teaching it. So the short answer that I can give you is the strategic learning of Islamic studies in general relies upon three things. Number one, the acquisition of the Arabic language. And I cannot emphasize this further, and that is a person who wants to learn about the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to know Arabic language. And it's not just like, I studied in an intensive somewhere, or, I know how to read, the Quranic Arabic. If I have the Fatha Dhamma Kasra on it, that's really great. That's at a very, very introductory level. But you would really need to study Arabic a lot. And the best example that I can tell you is Arabic, the key to learning Arabic is the grammar in and of itself. An-nahu, as-sarf, morphology, how words turn, how they change from a noun to a verbal tense or to a verbal, a form, or a verbal noun, etc. All right. How do you formulate sentences? All of these sort of rules that govern Arabic language is what you call grammar, an-nahu. And if a person doesn't have nahu, it's very difficult for them to pick up on Arabic. So the best example I think is Arabic language is like a bamboo house with an iron door on it. And that iron door is grammar. So long as you break down that steel door, that iron door, the rest of Arabic falls into place. So it is a very, very an arduous and long process, and that we have to be patient about. So that's the first thing. Number two, the emphasis is on the Quran. And if you look at the Prophet ﷺ, the memorization of the Quran and the understanding of the Quran and the reflection, a tadabbur upon the Quran was a key element that Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu described his relationship and the companions radiallahu anhum, their relationship with the Prophet ﷺ in terms of the Quran. And that is, if you want to be serious about the deen, the most basic thing about you and the Quran is that you need to learn how to read the Quran. You need to learn how to at least get your hands on a great translation. You need to work on the Arabic, as we said in the first point, and memorize the Quran, right? That's one of the most important things. And a lot of people will say, well, brother, I can memorize the Quran whenever I can, whenever I learn the Quran, I can just do it, whenever I feel like it, and I don't have to focus on it right now. And that, I think, wallahu alam, Allah knows best, is not the best advice that you want to hear. Because all the rulings in Islam, everything is built upon the Quran and in turn the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So if you don't have a good grasp of how to read the Quran, read it with proper tajweed, and understand the meaning, and develop a close relationship with the Quran, then you are like someone who wants to learn how to make tiramisu cake and you don't know how to crack an egg into a bowl. Okay? It's like, I want to learn how to make, what is it called? Tres leches, right? I want to know how to make this amazing cake, even though I'm completely lactose intolerant, right? It's going to ruin my night. And I don't even know what flour is. I don't even know how to measure flour. Can you imagine, right? And in the same way, the Quran is like that, very, very basic. You don't have the ability or the knowledge or the wisdom to pluck the fruits if you haven't even worked on planting the seed yet, right? So it's not saying that you're not worth studying other subjects. It's saying that you really need to develop the relationship with your Quran, reading the Quran consistently, studying the Quran, learning the Quran, memorizing the Quran. And every person that I know of who has completed memorization of the Quran, they have a very, very special advantage over those who do not complete the Quran through memorization. And if you look at the scholars in the past, this is their tradition, and it was assumed that scholars had memorized the Quran. When you look in studies of hadith, you'll find that they will say like this person was al-hafiz, right, known as the one who memorized, and that doesn't refer to the person who memorized the Quran. It means the person who memorized the hadith, and of course they were people who had memorized the Quran, right? So that's the second. So we said Arabic, and then we now talk about the memorization of the Quran and developing that close relationship with the Quran. And then the third subject that I would suggest to you before we close out is having a solid, basic, non-sectarian, divisive approach to theology. A very basic, simple study of Aqidah, right? And when I say Aqidah, I'm not talking about, okay, I'm learning the 6 pillars of Iman, and therefore I'm good to go. I'm talking about understanding that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, understanding the 6 pillars of Iman for sure, understanding how Iman and Islam come together, having a really basic theological perspective. We don't need you to sit there and learn about, well, in the 4th century there was this group that popped up and they said this, or in the 7th century this sect showed up and their theology differs from traditional Islam as this and that. That's not important. What you need to know is the basics of Aqidah and a pretty good, solid foundation, and these 3 subjects. And if you look at these 3 subjects, whether it's Arabic, Quran, or theology, they all inform one another. And Arabic obviously being the most basic one. So the stronger your Arabic is, the more you will understand the Quran. The stronger your Quran is, the more you can appreciate those verses in the Quran that talk about theology and the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, to close out, what if someone comes and says, I want to learn, seerah, I want to learn fiqh, I want to learn, topics that are relevant today, Black Lives Matter, or I want to learn about how Islam deals with the topic of racism, or I want to learn about what Islam says about racial tensions, or gender relations, etc., right? Now, there's 2 issues that I want to bring up, and that is, the Prophet ﷺ, when he taught his companions, he didn't teach his companions based on topics and issues. And in fact, he simply dealt with the companions at a very rudimentary level. Who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What is our mission? To worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to serve other people, and to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by helping other people, right? And the Prophet ﷺ kept the message very, very simple throughout his life, and most obviously in the first 13 years when he was in Mecca. And those rules of Islam didn't come up until he was in Medina towards the late stages, right? So when a person studies topical based of Islam, that is a huge risk. That you're going to understand one issue from a very, very surface level, but you're not going to understand the fundamentals that govern those issues. You might not fully understand how to apply those issues if you don't have a proper foundational understanding, right? So what I'm telling you are the basic building blocks. Quran, theology, Arabic language. These are the 3 that people should work on. And another point that I want to talk about is there's a certain type of sweetness that comes to a person who is patient with seeking knowledge, especially at that very nascent early stage. And what I mean by that is when you are sitting there learning Arabic and you're itching to learn more about the seerah, we're not saying you can't learn about the seerah, we're not saying you can't learn about madhahib, we're saying when you focus on these 3 subjects and you spend a lot of time mastering them, sitting with scholars, learning, and sticking to these 3, you develop a sweetness in patience and in adab and manners of how you conduct yourself in the presence of sacred knowledge. Okay? And when a person does not have enough patience to learn the basic fundamentals, but instead jumps to a higher level that is above their intellectual prowess, or the level that they are at, what ends up happening is that they would have holes in their understanding. They're going to have mistakes in their understanding. They're going to have problems in how they apply Islam. They might look at one issue and deduce a correlation that doesn't even exist between the issue that they're trying to talk about, right? And so this is what I wanted to share with you today, and that is the concept of when you are trying to seek knowledge, you're going to look at your local imam, or the person who studied a law, or maybe based on the issues that you have. And all of these three things are great, but what is even more fundamental than those three frameworks are learning the Quran, learning the Arabic language, having a basic understanding of theology. And then from there, once you master these three, then you can start learning a little bit about, for example, fundamentals of fiqh, right? Not even madahib, just basic fundamentals of fiqh, basic fundamentals of the science of the Quran, basic fundamentals on the science of hadith and how they are compiled. And once you master these subjects, then you can start opening up fiqh books with the guidance of a teacher, opening up hadith books to better understand, and so on and so forth. So again, this is what I wanted to share with you, and I hope it wasn't too complicated. I apologize for the delay in the time, and I also, because I had some technical difficulties, and I will, inshallah, join you next week at this time, Wednesday, inshallah, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you very much for watching, and if I've said anything wrong, may Allah forgive me, and love you all for the sake of Allah. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, shalla la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.